Okay, we are live. Michael, if you want to.
Okay, I'm going to start the meeting at approximately 1:08 today. I'm going to do a roll call of the committee members. Chairman Ferranti here. Carol Ty. Looks like she's absent. Anthony D'Ambrosio.
Here.
Okay. All right. So, and then I want to make a notation of the other members that are at the meeting. I'll just read them as I see them. Superintendent Diane Kelly, Assistant Superintendent Danielle McColber, Member Fred Sinella, CFO Matt Cruz, Member Susan Gravelisi, Mayor Arrigo, and Member Stacy Rizzo. We do have a roll call. Matt, I'm going to let you take it from here. If anybody has questions, just ask them as we go instead of trying to accumulate them at the end, so we can just do it as see fit.
Sure.
Matt, take it from here.
Great. So I'm going to share screen, and I'm going to pull up the second of the documents that were given beforehand, and we'll ease into this conversation with this one. So this is just a quarterly financial report through the first 3 months of the current fiscal year. We track these obviously 4 times as the year rolls around. The most useful part to this, unless there are other questions we can walk through, is just to see, hey, has anything already entered into a deficit within the first 3 months through unexpected spending? Are all of our series tracking with surplus balances? Is there anything in the current year that's caught us off guard in the first 3 months? So if you looked through the detail pages, you would have only seen one red item within the first 3 months, and that was the retirement incentives line item. So there was a retirement incentive offered as a part of the city's response to the coronavirus COVID situation. And a number of folks took advantage of that. And for some of them, that included their retirement incentive happening earlier than we would have expected in their timing. So that's the one account that currently has something of a deficit. It's not a big one, $37,000. And the first thing we would keep an eye on for covering that deficit would be any surplus as the year rolls in 5,000 series benefit accounts. And the place that we would expect that may be with our unemployment costs, because although we do have much higher unemployment costs than we budgeted, those costs will be able to be covered by some of the coronavirus relief grant monies that are coming in. So that's the one deficit that we've seen in the first 90 days. And we'll keep an eye on the balances in the other 5,000 series accounts. Any surplus in any other 5,000 series account can flow to help cover the deficit in the retirement incentive accounts. And I think now would be good if anybody had any other questions about the current year's first 90 days.
Anybody have any questions? If not, Matt, I have some questions. On the in the deficit balance, and you said there were a bunch of people. How many people are we talking about that use their retirement incentive plan?
Oh, I don't know. I can pull it and email it to the committee. Normally what happens is that account is barely touched during the year. Sometimes someone's start date will be staggered, but normally we're looking at that account in April, May, June, when we receive intentions to retire. And then we see who's on that list and who is eligible for a retirement incentive. As you would imagine, the folks who took advantage of the city's earlier retirement offer would have been the ones who were close and who have had good longevity with us. They're the ones who would benefit from it. So there was no surprise that that would exceed that amount. And when you voted the budget, we reduced that budget down to 50 because in the last 2 years, very few people have qualified for the incentive. And so, no one saw the early retirement option coming. I can send a list to the committee of exactly who qualified and what the payout was from that line.
Going forward, Matt, we may have more this year, that could retire at the end of the year, for whatever the circumstances. So it's something to think about of maybe next year we'll have to put more money in there just to be on the safe side.
Right.
I would think that you would see more teachers getting out, I would think, with the current circumstances with the remote learning. So
Right.
it's something I think we have to think about. I'm concerned about several categories here. And, when I went series by series, I took what you gave us and the numbers you gave us plus what we expended. And it seems like a little flip. For instance, that the administrative account was $140 short, but the instructional services was $140 plus. So is that just basically moving numbers around?
Yeah, if we're dealing with numbers that small, then there's multiple possible things to cause that, including, we're with $94 million, I'm presenting you numbers that are rounded to the dollar, and all the actuals behind this obviously go to the hundredth and the second penny. So that kind of a variance could just be caused from pulling reports and simplifying them for you.
No. It's, and I'll just give you an example. Let's take the administrative. You budgeted 2.5 million. Let's forget about the rest of the penny. But when we did the budget, we only budgeted 2.4. And obviously that was a shortage, that what you gave us. But the instructional service was the opposite. So am I saying is that expenses got taken out of one and put in another, or vice versa? I'm just taking the budgeted numbers that you gave us in the budget plus what you have today.
Yep. So I'm not going to share the screen, but I'm going to pull up the FY21 budget. Oh, I see what you're saying. So you're not talking about $140. You're talking about
No,
$140,000. Okay.
Yeah, the $140 I don't care about, but it's $140,000. I just want to know, like on some of the accounts, and I worked with a couple others too, is why is there such a big variance there?
Oh, yeah,
I'm not
sure.
questioning, I just want to know why.
Yep. So what'll happen is sometimes when we're voting something in April, May, it'll be categorized in an administrative expense. And then if that person's actual work in the fiscal year is more appropriately classified as instructional,
Okay.
or we're going to get a benefit in the 2000 series, then we're slotting those things in that place after the fact. So the bottom line won't change.
Right, yeah,
And so-
they basically didn't. They didn't change. Okay, so that's what that is. All right, now going back to what you gave us. In one category I'm really concerned about is number 30, legal services, where we've used probably about 60% of the money, which it looks like it's just gonna go from here to eternity, it looks like. Is there any thought that we should be putting some money, extra money in there, or is there enough money in the series to carry it? Because I think we're gonna spend well above what we budgeted there.
Right. So there is no question that that's true, that the help that we got from the lawyers in talking through remote learning and everything to do with that means that the cost for those legal services will be more than the original budget. It's the same pacing for us. That's another one that we would be flagging now, just like you said, and saying, okay, what kind of a deficit are we looking at over the course of the first 6 and then 9 months? And then in that 9th month conversation with Ways and Means saying, here's the actual projected deficit there. And where do we have surpluses that are in the same series as that could cover that for us? So retirement incentives and legal fees are just 2 examples of accounts where we know there's deficit coming. And then on the other hand, for example, substitutes or some supplies accounts, we know there's going to be big surpluses in those accounts as long as remote learning is happening. So in each of these quarterly reports, we'll pay attention to that and amend as necessary toward the back end of the year.
And I'm
Okay.
sorry if this is redundant, Matt. You might have said this already. I got pulled out for a minute, but did you mention that the negotiation costs for our legal services are creditable through the CARES Act? And that some of those charges will actually be paid there?
Right, so one of the things to remember, and we'll say it now and probably say it again toward the end of the meeting, is there's several $1 million of grant funding that has come in to help us deal with anything related to the pandemic, the remote learning, getting schools open virtually, all of those things. And so as we're able to charge those costs to those grants, we will do that. And you'll see balances change as you see the quarterly reports flow through. So legal services specifically around collective bargaining related to coronavirus would be the kind of costs that may have reclassification as the year unfolds.
But Matt, how do we know where that money is going to be allocated and when it'll be allocated? I mean, that's all well and good, but we'll just take the legal services. If most of that's covered, how do we know that?
Yep, so there's two different grants for that. One has a term ending December 31st of 2020, and then one runs through the end of the school year. So we're focusing our attention on the one that has the shorter term now, and then once that's fully spent and exhausted, we'll move to the one that has the longer term. So it'll unfold in double steps. If we're able to allocate those or other costs to the first one, we'll do that. You would see that on the second quarterly report, which is for the months of October, November, December. And then whatever hasn't been dealt with there can be dealt with in the second half of the year with the grant that runs through the end of the fiscal year.
And Michael, just to, our goal is to charge anything that is COVID related to those grants so that if there is quote unquote extra money somewhere, it's in our budget, which then becomes carry forward for next year. So we're being very diligent about charging where we can, anything that we can to the grants that were designed to help pay for these unexpected costs, like the legal fees for renegotiating contracts in light of COVID.
Right.
Yeah, but the thing is, Diane, I don't understand this. I understand we're getting the money, but how would we know where it's going to be allocated to, and where would it actually really show up in the statements? Because these are more expenditures than the what's on the income side of the balance.
Yeah, and I guess, Matt, maybe at the midpoint of the year when the COVID relief fund grant is expended at the end of December, we could do a rundown of not just our budget, but also the grants.
Sure.
The grants that we're talking about, Michael, are the ones that I have been presenting at school committee meetings,
Right.
Over the summer. And we have made plans for most of the allocations in them throughout. We are working right now on revising them. As I mentioned last time, we had budgeted a significant amount of funds for transportation costs that we don't currently need because we're full remote, unfortunately. But we did talk to DESE this week, and they're going to allow us to charge the portion of the contract that we have with Healy under our COVID relief funds, leaving our own transportation budget intact so that if we are able to come back to school in January or February or whenever we may be able to, we have those funds in our own budget to pay for transportation at that time. So there's definitely a lot of moving parts. And I think probably the best strategy would be what we just said, Matt. Maybe we can give a more comprehensive review than we typically do and actually go through all of those grants and everything at the midpoint of the year as well.
Yeah, basically,
Matt Cruz came up. Okay, Amber, thank you. Bye.
You're welcome.
So, basically, Diane, as long as, we see the grants where the money's being allocated, that would be fine with me. That's
Okay.
all. As long as we know where it's accounted for, so I can sort of follow the thing. That's all I'm looking for. Just being able to track it.
The first of those COVID-related grants ends on December 31st. So in January, at that school committee meeting, when I would typically present the second quarter financial report, I can also show a full report of that grant's expenditures. And then I can give an update on the ESSR grant that runs to the end of the school year.
Matt, how much is that grant for the end of the year? How much money did we get for that?
One's 1.6 million and one's a little more than 2 million.
The 2 million is the one at the end of the year?
That
Yeah,
we can
it's
spend all the way through the school year.
2.4 million was the Essr Grant, and that's good through the end of the year.
Okay.
The CVRF grant was the 1.6,
Okay.
and that's the one that has to be spent by December 30th.
Okay. And I don't think we'll have a problem spending it. Right?
Right.
Can't give any of it back.
No, we don't want to give any of it back. And that's why we really are diligently shuffling things to make sure that we're maximizing all of our different grant resources.
Does anybody else have any questions where I've sort of dominated this a little bit? Anybody else? The committee or any of the members?
That's not unusual because usually that first quarter, we're just getting our sea legs for the fiscal year. So we would flag any major budget discrepancy, but typically this first one is just making sure that we're on initial track. So the other document that we included for this meeting is that allocation of carry forward from FY20 into FY21. So typically what happens here is the Ways and Means Committee will do this review, and then I'll prepare an actual appropriation vote of the committee in the subsequent school committee meeting, which would be November, in which we're telling the city auditor, here was our free cash carry forward, and here's where we would like you to appropriate it in the current fiscal year. So we've done that every year in October, November, December. We're on target to do it in November. Just a reminder of the conversations we had in the spring, which we were doing our best job to estimate what would happen, having no experience in school being locked down and remote for 3 months. But we had said that in order to make this FY21 budget work, we were going to allocate a little more than $7 million of carry forward to instructional services and specifically classroom teachers remaining with us. So in order for that to have happened, we needed the carry forward to be at least the $7,046,000. So the carry forward actually came in at 7.9 million. That's a high number, but we also have to remember school operations basically shut down in mid-March. And so a ton of spending that typically would happen did not. A few examples are transportation services were compensated at only a portion of their contracted rates for the remote days, which triggered hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars of excess unspent monies. And then on the other end, for example, I just closed a purchase order for several $1,000s worth of paper that was encumbered in March, but was not needed by the school. And so those funds also flow into the carry forward. So we needed 7 million. We have 7.9 million of carry forward. To begin the conversation, and it can also end there, would be fine. The first thing we say is, well, for sure, we're going to put the 7,046,000 that we anticipated where we anticipated it because we need it there. So I've built that part of the entry, and it matches what you voted in June in the budget. There is $870,000 of additional carry forward that the committee will have to make a decision on. I think the first and simplest thought here is to go, hey, we don't know what next year's net school spending is going to be, how good or bad the budget is going to be. And so one thing we can do is say, we're just going to allow that $878,000 to flow through this fiscal year and be the beginning of building a carry forward that we're going to need for the next budget vote. And so last year we did that with a big portion of the carry forward, allocated some where we needed it. Right now, this worksheet just shows the entire surplus being flowed and passed through to get us started for some breathing room in next year's budget process.
And that is my recommendation to the school committee, that we not at this time spend any of the additional carry forward monies, that we just let them pass through until we have a better understanding in the spring of where we are financially and where the state is financially.
Yes. And just a reminder, by allocating the money that way, we don't lose it. And if for some reason there was a mid-year reduction to net school spending and we lost income unexpectedly in this environment, then that money would be available in this fiscal year to deal with any of that income reduction in that way. So by not appropriating it to be spent, we don't lose it. We hold it for either one of those needs, either a mid-year emergency need or beginning to supplement next year's carry forward, because we don't know what that requirement's going to be on our end.
I mean, I think really the whole key, Matt, is depending if we can get back to school or not, obviously, where your transportation costs will go up and everything else. But with this $4 million of grants between the end of the year and the end of the school year, shouldn't that really about take care of all the expenses that we really need that are related to COVID?
So if I could speak to that, Matt. So those grants are the same grants that you guys already voted. They're spent. Like you already voted on those, on how we were going to allocate the funding for those grants in July when we first got them. And they paid for things like the parent liaisons and Dr. Garcia's position as assistant superintendent of equity and inclusion. And so it's not like we have $4 million that we're waiting to spend. That's money that's already basically allocated and spent. And what we're learning as we move through the pandemic is that things change. And what we anticipate today to happen in January can be entirely different than the reality. And so when we wrote those grants over the summer and allocated a bunch of money for transportation that we don't right now need, we were able to work with the state and change out our own budgetary allocations for transportation with the grant money so that we wouldn't end up having to just return hundreds of thousands of dollars in grant money. Does that make sense? But it's not like we don't have $4 million that we're waiting to say, what should we do with this?
No, I didn't say that. I just said that really should take care of all your expenses that have already been allocated for. I mean, you just got almost $1 million in carry forward money. I mean, unless something really out of the ordinary happens, you should be able to use that money for next year. I mean, obviously you can't, see what the future is going to be, but it would seem to me that our expenses without the kids and the teachers going back would be less. Agreed.
Yeah. And
So
so that's why we think, like, exactly as you just said, Michael, the best thing to do with the 878,000 is not touch it. And hopefully we have it available for next school year. If something came up, if something unexpected happened, I mean, I just feel like we can't predict anymore the way that we used to, what things are going to cost or what we're going to need. It's there if we need it.
Yeah, I mean, that's the safest thing to do and probably the smartest thing right now, because you always have it. If you need it, you can get it. If you don't need it, you just build towards next year, because like you said, God only knows what's going to happen next year.
Yes, and to circle back to what we had said before, there's only a small handful of accounts that we see at this point running into a deficit, and we think that we'll be able to cover those with surpluses in other accounts in the same series. So it's not like we're saying, oh no, there's $250,000 of costs that you did not budget for and that none of the grants can cover. Where are we going to get the money from it? Let's use some of the carry forward. At this point, that doesn't exist. So to just allocate it as intended to pass through into a subsequent fiscal year gives us the freedom to move on it if we need to, but sets us up for success going into the budget conversations in the spring.
Matt, and I think you probably already said, but I just want to double check it. If our unemployment costs skyrocket this year, is that money, some of that money covered through the grants?
Yes, so our unemployment costs are much higher than we would have expected, but we have explicit permission to use some of that COVID grant funding for those costs. Lou and I have done an analysis to allocate all costs actually stemming back past the start of this fiscal year through December 31st to the Coronavirus Relief Fund. So those will be covered in that way. And then we'll see if unemployment costs, what they look like continuing from there, and we'll find a way to amend that into another. So that was a big win, that those costs are allowable under the grants.
Does anybody else have any questions for Matt or Diane? I mean, Matt, when I started going through the things, you know, the expenses for the quarter, there were just really a couple of them that sort of stood out to me. And, you know, if you could just give me a little quick explanation on it.
Sure. Yeah.
On page 8, the top two, 115, 116, SPED 504 contracted services and SPED psychological evaluations, where there's money budgeted, expended, and then the burn rate is 0.
Yep.
Can you
So
just give a quick explanation of that, please?
Yeah, what we're doing with this report is we're in that middle column of expense and encumbrance, we're showing you that's all the money that's either literally invoices have been paid or payrolls have been cut, or it's money that's been encumbered anticipating costs coming in the year. So a lot of these accounts, we will encumber the monies at the start of the fiscal year and then pay the bills as they come in. What we're showing you with a burn rate is only actual invoices paid or payrolls paid compared to the original budget. So you'll notice in a lot of the recurring payroll accounts, the burn rate is somewhere between 23, 24, 25%. That's what you would expect because those monies get liquidated literally weekly with our payroll, and it's been 1/4 of the year. So for those, we would see that number. For the teacher payroll accounts, it's less of a burn rate because they're not paid immediately over the summer. They receive their balloon check later in the year. So you might notice a classroom teacher's burn rate may only be in the high teens. Then for something like a 504 services, we may have encumbered purchase orders for services beginning to be rendered in the month of September, but not actually having received those bills for September. So by the time I'm running my first quarterly report, the money has been encumbered, obligated, but it's not actually been spent. And so the burn rate helps to see to what degree have we actually put cash out of this account or not. And that becomes important later in the fiscal year. If you see a burn rate of above 100, that means that the expense in that line has actualized above the budget, and then we want to know why that happened. So you don't see any burn rates above 100% except for that one retirement incentives account.
All right, Matt, you have it up on the screen there, number 183, student services, transportation, other costs. What would that incur? I mean, that looks like a lot of money spent there.
Yeah, so transportation, other costs, that would primarily be leases
Okay,
on the buses that we provide the actual driver for. And we stagger them, so some are on first or second or third year of a lease. And that would be the amount that you're seeing in that line. And I'm just checking the burn rate, if I can figure out how to do this with my screen.
30%.
Right, so that means we've only paid 30% of those obligations that we've had for those leases so far.
And my last one, and it's probably the same explanation, number 200, utilities Garfield contract cleaning, 208,000, expenditures and incumbent 208, burn rate 14%. Is
Yeah,
that
so-
pretty much the same?
The Garfield contracted cleaning, what happened with that one was when it got entered into Munis, the account number, it wasn't the correct account number. So that purchase order is being amended so that not just the obligation, but the payments are both hitting the right account. So a naked eye on that one would say, how could there be nothing left, but we're at 14% of that? We're paying those contracted cleaning services out of two sources over the course of the year. So it's the same thing. We don't want to show you the money as available because it's intended to be spent on cleaning, but we haven't paid 10 months of bills yet.
I'm good. Anybody else?
So what will happen as this year unfolds with all of its uncertainty is we'll get clearer and clearer on where we're trending and where the different buckets of money are to cover costs, and clearer on how is this affecting our carry forward. So the other good news there is that if you imagine a purchase order that was encumbered last year for services for in-classroom special ed students, those services would have stopped being rendered when the lockdown began, but the purchase order would have remained encumbered through the end of the fiscal year. So as I begin to liquidate encumbrances from last year for services that just never had to be rendered, I'm anticipating our carry forward to be starting out in really good shape. So you have to imagine we realized some savings just from not paying substitutes and overtime in the month of the spring. We've already realized those savings, but there are more savings to be realized as I liquidate purchase orders for services that were not needed. We're in the process of doing that now. Probably by the December school committee meeting, I'll have a good bead on the beginnings of our carry forward going forward. And, you know, some years we need 4, some years 3, some years 7. All of that will unfold as we keep moving. And it's impossible to know now because we're still in process of doing some of that work.
Now, when you say we're in good shape, is there like a dollars and cents you could put on that, or you just think that because the accounts won't be used, the money will just be sitting there?
Well, so just big picture numbers, which get clearer as the year moves. You got to think, okay, we have 0, and let's say we're trying to get to $7 million of savings out of $140 million of spending this year to begin to supplement next year. We're likely to have 2 to 3 million that is cleared through in liquidated purchase orders. And I know that sounds like a shocking number at first, but if you sat at my desk, you would go, oh, the students moved out in the month of March, and so their tuitions out didn't get extended. And the services I just explained, and a lot of the transportation purchase orders that did not have a full 100% ride. So call that 2 to 3 million. We stagger the circuit breaker reimbursements that come in. So that'll be about $2 million that will be able to be staggered into next year. So now that's 4 to 5 million. We just talked about holding this $800,000 in our hands and using for that purpose. So now that would be 5 to 6 million. So it's only October, not even Halloween, but in the biggest brush of this as a Ways and Means Committee, you should be hearing those numbers and saying, all else equal, we're beginning to amass the kind of carry forward that we'll need. And we don't know how big it will be, but it's much better than going, oh, we only see 1 or 2 million in October. So those are all big figures. And I know later in the year, you see them in black and white. If we were trending in a different way, we'd be talking about that now. But all of that is strategic planning so that as we move into the budget season, we've got stable pockets to do it with.
Hopefully we will still be on the right path, but who knows what's going to happen with the state this year at the end of the fiscal year.
Right. And I know
That's a big problem.
when we hear numbers like, oh, we didn't spend $6 or $7 million, it sounds like so much money. But you have to remember net school spending this year is 125 million. And grants are pushing that are spending up, near 150. So 6 million is a small percentage of the total amount of dollars that we're trying to mobilize for education. So all of that is trending in the right direction. We can't do much more than talk in big picture numbers now, but as each month rolls, it gets clearer and clearer for us. So this report will go to the school committee herself, the quarterly report for that meeting. We can meet again as often as we'd like. It'll be that school committee meeting in January when I'll be able to do the reporting on the COVID grants and the second quarter, and we will have appropriated the carry forward, so we'll have a much clearer picture just before the governor's numbers come out for FY22.
Matt, my last question, that the grant money that we got, the roughly 4 million, if we don't get that next year, what's going to happen to our budget? Because that incurred a lot of the expenses, the grants. What's going to happen next year?
So I think time will tell on that. It's going to be a real problem for us if we're still in a COVID environment next year, but don't have any grant supports for it. But, and it's one of the reasons why I said to Matt, and what one of our goals is this year is to be as conservative as we can, because we know, at least from what I'm hearing, I don't know if Stacy or Brian are hearing anything different at the state level, but what I'm hearing is not good news for budgets next year, not good news for Student Opportunity Act, and that we might still be in a bit of a jam financially. So our goal right now is where we don't have to spend money to not spend money, and hopefully we can swell that carry forward amount. And we might even be in the position in the spring that we get a knock from the state because we didn't meet our net school spending amount, but that we did that in favor of having money to flow through to next fiscal year, when it's a lot more likely that we will be doing more of a traditional school kind of environment. I don't know if Stacy has heard anything, or if Brian has heard anything on what's happening at the state level.
Just that I attended, it was a small discussion with Senator Jason Lewis and Pat Jalen, and they weren't very optimistic, especially with the Student Opportunity Act money. And I just know with people like them, we need them on our side. So hopefully, but doubtful.
Yeah. Wasn't the same problem? This is the same problem last year, Stacy, that we were running into?
No, nothing.
Nothing.
The money was coming nicely. It's just, you know what? It doesn't. The money coming in for the pandemic relief is not the same. It can't be a substitute for the Student Opportunity Act, and that's how they're basically treating it. So
Well, and they have so many restrictions on it. You can spend it on this, you can't
Mhm.
spend it on that. Like one of the things we wanted to do was get document cameras for some of the classrooms because especially with the little kids, when the teachers are teaching them handwriting, it's great when they can actually write and then have that be their camera shot. And those got rejected. They said that we don't need them because we're in a remote learning environment. I'm like, so I don't know. It's tough. We're really doing the best we can to leverage the money the best way we can and really trying to preserve our own funding because our own funding can flow through. The grant money goes back if we don't spend it.
Mhm.
So,
Sad.
yeah.
Does anybody have any questions for Matt or Diane? Nothing? I'm all set.
Okay.
So
So I
Michael,
guess-
I'm gonna
yes.
ask Robin to put a motion on the agenda for the November meeting that you approve the $878,000 in carry forward to flow through to FY22.
Yeah,
Is that
that's
okay?
fine. Yep,
Okay.
that's fine. No problem.
And I'll put that paperwork together for Robin so that it's a simple vote and then walk it through up at City Hall.
Okay.
Shouldn't,
Go ahead, Carol.
shouldn't that be that the committee, that the Ways and Means Committee has approved such a motion? Do you need
You
a
want-
vote? That's my
Do you
question.
want to vote on that now, Carol, in the
No,
subcommittee?
yeah, we'll need a vote of the committee itself at the
Yes,
November
but you
meeting.
need,
So this
Agreed.
committee, your committee, Michael,
Yeah,
will make a recommendation to the committee
right,
at the regular session
Yeah.
to be voted on the floor.
but we need to vote on that now, so
Yeah.
it will be.
yeah,
in the
so
Right.
we'll vote on it as a subcommittee, we'll vote on that.
Mhm.
We'll
Okay,
vote on the
so
800,000.
I'll move that the subcommittee approve,
I'll second it.
okay?
Now let's do
And
a
then-
roll call.
And
So
so
we
then
should
the
do-
other vote would be Anthony, right?
Yes,
So I'm gonna make the Carol motion, I second, I'm doing a roll call. I vote yes. Carol?
I vote yes.
Anthony?
I vote yes.
Okay, so it's approved through the subcommittee, so we can go to the committee, next meeting.
Question?
Go ahead,
Please.
Steve.
So was this vote to include the 870,000 to go to carry forward and not be used? Is that part of your vote?
The vote is just to put it there right now, and if we need it, we can use it. If not, it'll go towards carry forward of next year. So the money is available for us to use this year.
So it is in your motion to put it towards the committee, to put it carry forward?
Well, why don't we include that in the motion? Do we need to amend the motion and then, and approve that? In that case, that's easy to do. I'll move that we amend the motion.
I'll second that.
So I'm sorry, I'm not clear now on what the motion's gonna say.
Well, I think Stacy was talking about is that the
Right.
motion that the money would go towards the carry forward of next year's budget.
Yes,
What exactly was the original motion?
The original motion was to take the money and just leave it in the budget, where it has an option of either being used this year. If it's not used this year, it'll go towards the carry forward of next year. So we still have the availability to use it if we need it this year. Preferably, we won't, but that's the
Right.
option we have with that money. Now, if you want to put a motion that way, then that's fine with me too. Whatever the committee feels comfortable with. What do you think, Diane?
Matt, are we okay? Dan, Diane, are we okay? Would you
Yeah,
want the
that-
motion to read in another manner?
No, that's fine. And then what will happen is in the school committee meeting in November, you'll actually be voting to put these funds in certain accounts that I present to you. And one of them will be a pass-through account. The others will be the classroom teacher accounts where we need them. So that recommendation from this committee will have teeth in what I give you to vote as an actual school committee so that it can be formally entered into the accounting system up at City Hall.
Okay.
Okay,
Everybody comfortable with that?
yes.
Okay. All right. We need a motion to adjourn.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, I'll second that. The meeting ends at 1:53. Anything else coming up, Diane, that we should know of?
We're on YouTube.
I know. I don't think, I don't think anything.
Okay. All right.
That's enough for me anyway.
Yeah.
All right, so at this point, we're done with this meeting.
Yeah.
And we'll see you at the next meeting.